Today, we're diving into a spiritual revolution, one that completely reshaped a subcontinent with a simple yet radical idea that anyone could have a direct personal connection to the divine. Let's get right into it. Just imagine for a second. What if you lived in a world where your social status, your entire worth, was decided the moment you were born? And what if you desperately wanted a connection with God, but you were told it was out of reach just because of who you were?
This wasn't just some thought experiment. For millions of people, this was their reality. And in response to that reality, a powerful new idea started to grow, an idea of an intense, personal, all-consuming love for God. This new path was for everyone. But to really get why that was so revolutionary, so absolutely mind-blowing at the time, we need to understand the world it came from, a world full of rigid rules and hierarchies.
See, in this world, your spiritual value was often tied directly to your birth. Religion could feel like this locked door, guarded by these super complex rituals that only a few people could perform. For so many people, this system created a deep spiritual thirst, a real yearning for something more direct, something more personal.
And then came the answer, Bhakti. This wasn't about fancy ceremonies or what your family name was. Nope. This was all about a direct, emotional, and loving relationship with a deity. A path that was suddenly, radically, open to absolutely everyone.
Now, an idea this powerful doesn't just pop up out of nowhere, right? It had ancient roots. It was talked about in sacred texts like the Bhagavad Gita. But these ancient embers, well, they were about to be fanned into a fire that would sweep across the entire land.
And the first real sparks of this spiritual fire, they actually ignited in the South. And they were carried not by priests or stuffy scholars, but by poets and singers whose songs were about to change everything.
So starting around the 7th century, this movement really starts to take shape. It formed around two main groups of wandering poet saints, the Nayanars, who sang these amazing songs to Shiva, and the Alvars, who were devoted to Vishnu. Their message was so powerful that, eventually, even kings started to pay attention, building these huge, grand temples that helped anchor these new devotional traditions
And these weren't your typical religious elite, not at all. The poets' saints came from every single walk of life. We're talking potters, peasants, soldiers, and even from castes that were considered untouchable. They traveled around, they wrote beautiful poetry in the language of the people, and they set it all to music. It was a total grassroots movement, spread by song.
Okay, so when a movement gets this big, it's not just going to change hearts, right? It's going to challenge minds. As Bhakti spread, it kicked off some really intense philosophical debates and even inspired rebels who wanted to tear down the entire old social order.
And this led to two very different ideas about the best way to reach the divine. On one side, you had the philosopher Shankara. He taught that salvation came through knowledge, basically understanding that your individual soul and the formless ultimate God are one and the same. But on the other side, you had Ramanuja, who was totally inspired by the poet saints. He argued the path was through love, an intense devotion that leads to this blissful union with a personal God.
So while the philosophers were debating, other reformers took these ideas of Bhakti and just ran with them to their most radical conclusions. A movement called Virashaivism, which started in Karnataka, challenged the whole system head-on.
Just listen to this incredible idea from Basavana, one of the movement's leaders. He's asking, why are we building temples out of stone when the human body itself is a living, moving temple? Things standing shall fall, he wrote, but the moving ever shall stay. His point is so profound. A stone building is eventually going to crumble, but the living, breathing person, the devotee, that is the true, eternal shrine.
This focus on a super-personal, love-driven faith wasn't happening in a vacuum. It was part of a much bigger spiritual current. In fact, mystics within Islam were exploring a very, very similar path to the divine.
We're talking about Sufism, and a lot like the Bhakti saints, Sufis believed that the most important thing wasn't all the elaborate rituals, but having a heart that was just full of love for God and compassion for other people. They were also seeking a direct, mystical union with God.
And when you look at their practices, the parallels are just stunning. Both traditions talked about God as a beloved. Both of them stressed how important it was to have a spiritual guide or a master. And both used chanting, music, and even ecstatic dancing as a way to connect directly with the divine.
So, you have this incredible mix of mystical ideas, Bhakti and Sufism, and it creates this powerful spiritual wave that then surges north, awakening brand new voices and reaching even greater heights.
This was a time of enormous change. New kingdoms were popping up. New jobs and professions were emerging. Saints started traveling and preaching in regional languages that people actually spoke, and huge crowds of ordinary folks, craftspeople, peasants, traders, flocked to hear what they had to say.
And this period gave us some of the most iconic figures you can imagine. You had saints like Kabir and Guru Nanak, who basically rejected all organized religions and their rituals. You had Tulsidas, whose retelling of the story of Rama made devotion accessible to millions. And of course, figures like Mirabai, a princess who gave up her entire royal life for her devotion to Krishna. So after all this, centuries of song and debate and rebellion, what's the takeaway? What is the lasting legacy of these saints? Well, their voices have echoed through time, and their impact is absolutely still felt today.
This quote, it just gets to the absolute heart of the movement. It's from the son of a saint from a caste that was considered untouchable. And he isn't just praying, he's questioning God directly, challenging him about the injustice of the caste system. This shows us that the Bhakti movement wasn't just about spirituality, it was a profound and incredibly courageous social critique.
So in the end, when you boil it all down, the Bhakti saints left this indelible mark. They questioned inequality, they argued for the inherent worth of every single person, they opened up a personal path to God for millions, and they created timeless art that is still sung and recited to this day. And that kind of brings us right back to today, doesn't it? The world has changed so much, but the core questions these saints asked about equality, about justice, and about what it means to have a personal connection to something bigger than ourselves, well, they remain as relevant as they've ever been. What do you think their voices can teach us now?